Sean, first crazy outcome of week 11, 28-10. Ole Miss beats Georgia. It looked like Georgia was going to have a pretty handed hold over this game as they came out swinging. Early pressures on Jackson Dart, could not get the ball off. He gets banged up. Austin Simmons comes in. One assumes that the game was already over. Heck, I even thought that the game was already over. But Simmons marches down, scores. Jackson Dart comes back into the game. And that offense for Ole Miss started to take over. And the ineptitude for Georgia and their unwillingness to be aggressive caught up to them. Biggest thing for me talking about Ole Miss, though, they firmly re-enter the playoff picture. They have a very winnable stretch coming up in their schedule where if they finish out with this win on their resume, they have played themselves into the conversation. It's even going to bolster their case as one of the teams that they'll be fighting with is Tennessee, who has to face off with Georgia on the road, and presumably, I think many people would project, will lose that football game. But the biggest difference and the big thing that went against everybody's assumptions was that Lane Kiffin showed up and called a great game. He did not overthink things. Talk about that after the Kentucky game where they lost. Did not overthink, did not overcoach himself. He did exactly what they needed to do to move the ball down the field. And most importantly, that defensive line got after Carson Beck as he had another pretty rough game.
Yeah, I'll give credit to Ole Miss in this one. I didn't love Lane continuously running Jackson Dart after he had previously gotten an injury, but I've said it on the show, and I don't know why I forget it, but he proves it to me every single week. Jackson Dart might be the toughest player in college football because he gets lit the hell up week after week in that pocket, stands in the pocket, all the big SEC defensive linemen crashing down on him, and I don't see him come out of the game. I don't see him duck away from any of the smoke. Like it's about like I have to recognize it at this point. I don't see any other college quarterbacks that have this guy's grit and toughness when it comes to the ability of taking hits and mentally staying in a ball game. That dude is certifiably elite when it comes to that trait. Lane did a great job today, and we have been heavily critical of Lane Kiffin on this show about his disappearance when it comes to playing the big bad teams in the SEC. Didn't happen today. They made Georgia look super vulnerable. What an embarrassment from them. I know you have tons of thoughts, but Ole Miss, congrats. Yeah, you just beat them bad, and you beat them in the rain in poor weather conditions, which tells me one thing. You wanted it more than Georgia did, and you were more physical than Georgia was, which if those were two predictions that someone gave to me before the week that would happen, I'd spit in their face because that's crazy to assume that Georgia was going to get out-willed and out-physicaled, but they did for 4 straight quarters.
Remaining 2 games that Ole Miss has, they play Florida, I believe on the road, and then they get Mississippi State at home. So that is, and they've got a bye week coming up. So they are in prime pole position to make it to the playoff. I don't think that they're going to get into the SEC championship game as there is still a long list of teams that are ahead of them. It also currently has Georgia ranked ahead of them in the SEC standings, but there's no reason why, again, we're putting a lot of faith in here. We already saw a Kentucky loss that they won't drop one of those games, but if they play like that, if their defensive line plays as aggressively as they did, there's zero chance that they're going to drop those remaining 2 games. I feel like them being in the playoff is a lock. Georgia needs to win out. The Tennessee game that they have remaining is going to be extremely crucial for their playoff hopes, but it feels like a 2-loss team is not going to be removed from the equation because of the big wins that they've had this year, especially that Texas victory. They're not going to lose to UMass. They're not going to lose to Georgia Tech, I would assume. Again, putting a little bit of faith in something that things have been so crazy this year. But Ole Miss, again, just to reiterate that, it seems like they're in a really good spot.
Well, if Carson Beck plays like he did today and the Georgia football team preserves the ball like the way that they did today, they can lose to anybody. All the fumbles, the awful interception from Carson Beck, the low passing yards, the lack of creativity on offense, I don't know. I yell in this microphone week in and week out about Georgia just running wide receiver screens all game, and they do it every single time. And God willing, Ole Miss finally said, we're gonna beat the blocks on the outside and not let you get yardage, not just let you move the ball as if you could run the ball with this little gadget play. They stopped it, and Georgia kept doing it. They can't adapt this year. Mike Bobo isn't good at that. Carson Beck isn't good enough to pull them out of the depths. The running game isn't good enough. It wasn't there. They were getting bullied up front. This is an awful, awful game from Georgia because they should have beat Ole Miss. They knew Lane's dying to give one up to another top 5 team. His first one. Congratulations at Ole Miss. Way to be, finally getting it done. Georgia's so embarrassing. Top to bottom, awful game from them.
And their offensive line that was supposed to be a strength did not play well at all. They were supposed to be able to block
5 sacks.
Block these guys man on man. They shouldn't have needed extra protection or really need to slide in any particular direction to prepare for pressures. But they gave up a lot of easy pressures, a lot of quick pressures to Carson Beck.